Hi there, everybody. Wes Olszewski here again, author and builder of model boats and stuff, coming to you from my poorly lit studios and my workshop as well. For all of you who have watched my video of the MAUTHE Trip, there's a lot in there, but there's also a lot that's not in there. And so this video is going to be about the backstories. This is about the stuff that I couldn't put in the story in the book, and the stuff that is not in the video. It's kind of fun, and we're going to go through it right now. My unexpected arrival. Just after 11 o'clock, I arrived at the dock where the MAUTHE was unloading. And they had not gotten the letter from the main office that said that I was coming. So no one expected me. The only person that I could find on deck was the first mate. So I called up to him and shouted up that I was their passenger for this trip. He had heard nothing about it. But when I told him the name of the vice president of the company who had told me to go aboard, he reluctantly threw down a rope for me to tie my bag to and said, "Come on up the ladder," and I went up the ladder. Subsequently, the first mate and I really didn't get along very well for the early part of the trip. As a matter of fact, he very rarely spoke to me, and I found out later why. He didn't want to be in my book. And I told him, well, it's my book, and I'll write it any way I want. I'm not going to put your name in it if you don't want me to. I'll just say the first mate. After that, we were buddies. So anyway, and later on in the trip, right at the end of the trip, he pranked me really good. But that was my unexpected arrival. I woke up the next morning and ran into the captain face to face right up on the guest deck there on the Texas deck. And he hadn't heard about me coming either, but we were ready to go. So the only problem I had was that I found out I was allergic to grain dust. Thought I was catching a horrible cold. And they all told me, nope, it's the grain dust. So you'll be better as we get out on the lake. 40-knot winds on Lake Huron. On the second day of the trip, I woke up northern Lake Huron. I'd been up all night going through the Detroit River. So after standing that watch, I went to bed, woke up in the morning to the sound of something that sounded like a big thump. Like someone had hit a large 55-gallon drum with a mallet at the end of a long tunnel. And I didn't know what that was, but it woke me up real good. So I dashed up to the pilot house to see what was going on, and they're all sitting up there relaxed. The wind was blowing at around 40 knots. And we had 12 to 14 foot waves, and the captain just casually said, "She's stubbing her toe." And that was the MAUTHE's bow hitting those waves. So the result was that we were taking some pretty good seas. And all of a sudden, one big splash came right over top of the pilot house. I had to get that on video. So I ran back down to my cabin, got my camcorder, and came up, and I waited. And it didn't happen again. So the captain said, let's go about a point or so over to the east and see if we can get Wes another wave. We went over a point or so to the east, and not only did we not get another wave, but the MAUTHE rode better on that course than it did on the one we had been on. So he just kept us there, and I didn't get my wave. I found out why the first mate and some of the crew were not happy having me aboard. And that is, as we went across Lake Erie, I was told that on the previous trip, they had a team of reporters from a local news station on board. And those individuals had hidden a voice-activated tape recorder in the pilot house. But the idiots stored it in the holder where the binoculars went, as if the crew is not going to use the binoculars. So it was found almost immediately. That tape recorder was at the bottom of Lake Erie. They asked about whether or not I had a tape recorder, and I said, I sure do, but it isn't hidden here. It's downstairs, and it's plugged into my marine scanner. So anything you don't want taped, don't say it over the radio. We had a pretty good laugh about that. But after standing a few watches, they found out that I was a pretty good guy and I wasn't going to do anything like that. So that's why I have the real live conversation between the captain of the MAUTHE and the captain of the Callaway very clear on tape, because my tape recorder was where it belonged, in my cabin, hooked up to my marine scanner. Watching the hull flex. While we were in those 40-knot winds and 12 to 14-foot seas, I noticed that if you looked aft, you could very clearly see the MAUTHE's hull flexing in the waves, which is normal. I had to get that on video. So I took my camcorder and I held it out there and tried to get the video of it. No can do. It really didn't look right. But then I found out if I put it on the tripod, you could clearly see it. So I hooked up the tripod, and that's the video you see here, is the hull flexing in those waves. Gray paint phantom. Take a close look at the gray painted deck. This is in the forecastle on the MAUTHE. It's a wonderful gray paint. It looks great. It's very durable and very difficult to apply. One day I was coming through one of the companionways and I looked, and right in front of me was a crew member down there on the deck painting it. And I said, whoa, I don't want to step on your freshly painted deck. And he says, well, that makes one person. Said, what do you mean? And he says, every watch I've been painting this deck when I had the time, and someone walks through it every time, and I got to come back and repaint the dang thing. And he says, if I catch the guy, I'm going to wring his neck. I said, well, it wasn't me. And he says, I know it's not you because you don't have gray paint on your sneakers. He said, that guy's going to have gray paint on his sneakers. I've been looking at everybody's sneakers, and when I catch that guy, I'm going to wring his neck. And I said, whoa, well, I'll look for him too if I can. And he went back to his work. So a couple days later, I relayed that story to another crew member. And he smiled and he said, come on with me, can you keep a secret? And I said, yeah. So he took me down there into the windlass room, and we walked inside, and he reached up into a nook way up there in the rafters, and he pulled out this pair of sneakers just full of gray paint. And he said, I'm the one that walks through his paint. And he said, he ain't never going to catch me because I hide these here, but don't tell anybody. He was pranking that guy for I don't know how long. And you got to remember that these guys are cooped up together on this vessel for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time. And sometimes they just have to vent. And that's the way this guy was venting, was he was pranking another crew member walking through his paint. So the phantom was still there after I left the boat. Seeding the ice. The crew was at the end of their season, and they really wanted to go home. But the only way they could do that is if the waters of Duluth Harbor froze over solid and they couldn't get in or out for another trip. The captain had quipped to another captain when they asked, how many more trips have you got? He said, well, they tell us 2 and then they hold up 4 fingers. So they really didn't know how many more trips they had, but they were really anxious for that ice to form on the Duluth Harbor. So as we were going into the harbor, I looked around and I saw the ice down there, and it really wasn't too bad. But I had a drink in my hand with some ice in it. So I took some ice cubes and I threw them off the bridge wing into the water. And I came back in and the captain said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm seeding the ice for you. Hopefully it'll grow before your next trip." And he looked at me and said, "Go get a bigger cup and keep doing it." Feeding the fish. After loading grain, the entire upper surface of the entire vessel was covered in grain. Not a thick coating, but just enough that you could really see it. If you look at the video, you can see the yellow coating everywhere. So it was up to the crew members to go out with a hose and squirt off the grain. And they said they did it in the same basic area every trip, which means that the fish in that area were very well fed. And one of the deckhands said, that's what they're doing. They're feeding the fish. The third cook. There were 3 cooks on the MAUTHE. There was the chief cook, and then there was the second cook, and then there was a third cook. Mary, the second cook, made the greatest blueberry pancakes in the world, as it says in the video. The third cook was a really cool guy, and you see him here in this little clip. He was the pie master. He made great pies. Now, I wanted to eat not only in the officers' quarters, but also I wanted to eat with the crew. They wouldn't let me. Tradition and company policy prevented me from eating in the crew galley. So I had to dine in the officer's galley. And one night early in the trip, I was dining there with the second mate. His name was Jeff. And the third cook came over and he said, "Is there anything special that you would like? Because I can make just about anything." And I thought for a minute, I said, "Well, I'm kind of been into fresh spinach salads lately." And he went, "I've got fresh spinach." And the second mate looked over and went, "You have fresh spinach?" And he's like, "Yeah." He says, "I got fresh spinach, but it's just for guests. It's not for you guys." He said, "If I give it to you guys, you'll eat it all up." And so the second mate says, No. If he gets spinach, I want spinach." "No way," says the third cook. So I told him, I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. I won't rat you out to the crew if you let Jeff have his spinach salad too." And that was the deal. So we got along well after that. But for the rest of the trip, the second mate and I had our dinners with our secret spinach salads. My cabin and the $5 bet. Here's a view of my cabin on board the MAUTHE. And you can see from the video where my 2 portholes were. The cabin was very nice, very clean. It was very 1950s. Once you got in there, you felt like you were in the late 50s, early 60s. I barely was in there, so I only had enough time to take a shower and remake my bed, and that was it. But one of the things that I really noticed in there was that the bell for the general alarm was right up on the ceiling, just over my head in the bed. And it says, big sign says, when the general alarm rings, go to your lifeboat stations, blah, 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 blah. So everybody knows what a general alarm means. We had finished coming down the Detroit River on our way to finish the trip in Cross Lake Erie. I had been up the entire night standing watch with these guys while we went down the river. And as we got into daylight, I shot a few videos of some lake boats passing, and I was wiped. So I told the first mate, I said, "I'm going to go down to my cabin and crash for a few hours." And he said, "Yeah, that's a good thing. Go on down and get yourself some sleep." I said, "Okay." So I went down, laid down in my bed, and went out like somebody hit me in the head with a brick. I had just fallen asleep, and that damn general alarm went off. And the boat's horn is tooting. And I thought, we're going to sink, and I'm missing it. Now, what I didn't know was that on this trip, and on every trip, they have to do a Coast Guard required emergency drill of some type. This was going to be a fire drill. And up in the pilot house, the first mate and the wheelsman had a bet going. After having watched me with my camcorder for 12 days, they bet, number one, the first mate said he's going to come out of his cabin with his survival suit on, ready to go into the lifeboats. And the wheelsman said, no. My bet is he's going to come out of there in his underwear with his camcorder. The wheelsman won, because I come dashing out, not in my underwear, but in my warm-ups, with my camcorder, and I stepped out on deck expecting to see some type of emergency that I could record, and instead what I got were these guys squirting a hose over the side, and the klaxon going off, and the horn blowing, and I looked up on the bridge wing, and there stood the first mate and the wheelsman, and the first mate reached over and handed a $5 bill to the wheelsman, who happily took it and went back to his station. So that was their prank on me. They were laughing. The first mate shouted down to me, he said, "Where's your survival suit? You're supposed to be in your survival suit." I said, "Where is it?" And he said, "It's under your bed." So I went back to my cabin and I looked, and there was no survival suit. And I went to the next bed and looked, and there was no survival suit. So I came back out, I said, "There aren't any under my bed." And he said, "Look at the other bed." I said, "I did, there are none in there." And he said, "Well, damn," like that. And so later on I was up in the pilot house, and he said, "We're going to contact the Coast Guard," because apparently that news crew, the ones that had hidden the tape recorder in the pilot house, when they left, had packed up both survival suits and stolen them as well. So the Coast Guard were probably notified, and somebody from a local TV station probably got a visit from some very serious Coast Guardsmen. So those are some of the backstories of my trip on the JL MAUTHE. It was a lot of fun. It was a trip of a lifetime. It was a lifetime adventure. And the crew were great. The company was great. And I really could not say anything bad about the experience. It was great. I cannot say the first mate's name because I promised him I would never make it public. And I don't even know if he's still living. But that was my promise, and I'm keeping it. And right here was where I stayed.